Hi there and welcome to this knowledge tutorial on early Elizabethan England, and like a previous tutorial, what I've decided to do is look at a possible exam question, this time a 12 marker, and it's looking at why there was poverty in early Elizabethan England. Now, as you can see, you've got your two stimulus points, your enclosure system and rising population, but it says you must include information of your own. And when I was thinking about this question, I was there thinking, right, yep, how would I go about answering this? So I thought I'd make it into a tutorial for you guys. So first thing, let's go through the rules. 12 marks, you want to get it done in 18 minutes, no longer than that. You should really try for 15. I know that I've talked in the past about 6-minute paragraphs, but if you can get it down to 5, which you can, that'd be brilliant. It gives you more time for planning, means you've got a chance to kind of work it through. So the targets, much like a previous tutorial, we can see the analysis of second order concepts, i.e. causation. So within this question will always be what caused it. If you think back with paper 2, Cold War is lots of consequences. So here we've got a causation question. For Elizabeth, there will always be something about what caused it. So it could be what caused poverty, it could be what caused the threats against Elizabeth, it could be about what caused the Spanish Armada. There will always be a causation question. What caused the development of exploration in Elizabethan England? And then if we see here, knowledge and understanding, AO1, and it's equally weighted across the two. Now then, let's have a look at the exam board want. What do they want from you? So really simple overview. Level 1, it's a simple or generalized answer, i.e. you're not really focusing on the question. It talks about a lack of development and organisation, which means there's not real much of a structure. You're just writing the stimulus material down. You might offer some limited knowledge about those particular aspects. It might be quite generalised, but you're aware of the topic, but you're not really answering the question. Level 2, you are beginning to explain, but if you notice, it talks about limited analysis, and it's also implicit or unsustained. So what that means is that you're doing an explanation, but it's not really focused on the question. There's an overview of it, but what you're seeing is you've got accurate and relevant information. However, you need to be addressing it back to the question, and that's not really there in a developed way. Note, you can't get more than 5 marks if you don't go beyond the stimulus material. So you're going to be on 4 to 5 marks only if you address those 2 bullet points and nothing else. Level 3, here's where most candidates would be wanting to be to get a good pass. And it says here that we've got an explanation. Okay, it shows some analysis, mainly directed. So it's in the fact that what it's saying now is that you might get a paragraph that's really well explained back to the question. Another paragraph, it's more level 2, and that's going to be an example of level 3. A line of reasoning that's generally sustained. So again, what we're saying is that the majority of the answer is linked back to the question, but there's some variation in it. There's one paragraph that maybe isn't as strong. Notice that we're moving from good knowledge to accurate, and it's relevant knowledge, relevant information to back up or to support your explanation. And again, now you can't get more than 8 marks if you don't go beyond the stimulus material. Level 4 is really level 3, just done, the good level 3 done all the time, because it's directed and consistently at the focus of the question. Okay, it's got a logical structure, accurate information, relevant, it's precise, and it's selected to address the question. And again, you can't get level 4 without having stimulus material. So let's go through what we could have talked about. And the first thing we're going to do is look at sheep farming and the wool trade, which wasn't mentioned in the stimulus material. Well, English wool was its biggest export, and it was very profitable. Sheep farmers had lots of sheep, and because of that they needed land to keep them on. If you were a farmer and you could have a choice of growing crops or wool via sheep farming, then you were going to look at sheep. It was more profitable. That meant that the sheep needed food. So sheep farming took land that had been used for growing crops so they could graze on it. You'd turn the field to grass and the sheep would graze on that land. Some farmers also took common land, and that was land that was free for all people to use. Now, in winter time, the sheep would go inside, they can't graze on the grass isn't growing. So what would happen would be some of the fields during the spring and summer would be turned over to grow crops, not for humans to eat, but for the animals. You would harvest them and store them over winter, and that would be for the sheep to eat in other times. And that meant you were taking more and more land for sheep to kind of graze on and to be produced to get that wool. And this meant that it reduced the amount of food being produced for human beings, and that led to rising prices, which, due to other factors, people couldn't afford. Another reason, though, perhaps more importantly, linking back to the poverty, was that sheep farming didn't need as many workers. So that meant that farm labourers who would typically have looked for work on farms were now being made unemployed and moving to the towns looking for alternative work. Another big reason was England's population. It was rising by around about 35%, but if you said a third, that would do as well. Now, more people meant lower wages, and the reason for that is there was a greater supply of workers, and when there's a greater supply, you don't have to think about paying people more. There's enough workers out there that you can keep your prices the same, and they'll be glad for that. So that meant that people were then struggling to pay for simple things such as bread. With more people, the cost of rent for land and homes also went up because there was more competition for these. And issues like wool farming and enclosure, which we come on to next, also meant there was an increasing population within the towns themselves because of unemployment hitting the countryside. Further to this was that food wasn't grown in the towns and cities, it was brought in from the countryside, and therefore with more mouths to feed and with bad harvests that occurred in pretty much every decade of the Elizabethan era we look at, all these factors led up to an increasing degree of poverty. The final reason was that the large three-field system that we would have had in medieval England was changed to small privately owned ones, and we can see this example here with all these smaller fields. Small fields meant that smaller farms were being merged. Smaller farms were being kind of like phased out, and tenant farmers, the poorer farmers who rented the land rather than owned it, ended up being evicted, and this was linked into the wool trade to a degree. So farmers enclosed their fields to stop animals walking across crops, and it also meant you could grow one crop in one field, making it kind of more likely to grow, and then another crop in another field, and then you could rotate them around like that if you wanted to. Now, although arable farming, i.e. growing crops on enclosed land, was done, remember some of the time it was down to the idea of growing crops for the animals, not for the human beings. It meant you needed less labourers to work on it. So, as we said, unemployment rose. Also, common land also began to be enclosed, and it was no longer free for everyone to use. And that stopped subsistence farming, where farm labourers would typically try to grow food on common land or have a few animals on common land. That was now gone, so their opportunities to grow food for themselves was also gone. So that linked in with the need for less labourers, also increased poverty. So let's go back to this question. We've got our mark scheme, we've got our focus area, we've got our stimulus material, we've got our time. How would we go about doing it? Well, this is an example paragraph, one paragraph out of 3. So we've got a narration here. One highly significant reason why there was poverty in Elizabethan times was due to the rising population. This can be seen by the fact that the population went up by around 35%. Remember, if you said a third, that'd still do. Large numbers of the population also moved from the countryside to the town. This meant there was more demand for the food being produced, which resulted in higher prices. But wages were not increasing as there were more people wanting work, which kept wages low. This therefore caused poverty in Elizabethan England. Now, if I look at this, here in the purple, I've got my point. In the red, I've got my evidence, and in the blue is my explanation. So very much a point, evidence, explain, response. And this therefore would get me a level 3. My explanation links back to the question that's been set. I have also got specific detail being applied. Well, I hope this has been useful. Any queries or questions, please feel free to comment, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.